Welcome back, everyone. My name is Eden, and I will be facilitating this afternoon's session, which is a lovely panel of practitioners and members of the network. So yeah, welcome back. Today I'll be joined by three great practitioners who will be speaking to us about an aspect of their practice before we proceed on to a Q&A. So we're joined here today by Charlene Graham, a senior occupational therapist working for Hertfordshire County Council in adult care services with older people with the enablement team. And Charlene is also a committee member of BAMEOTuk UK. I'm also joined by Cheryl Tayson, an occupational therapy activist of Ghanaian heritage that advocates anti-racism within occupational therapy as a member of BAMEOTuk UK and as an alumni member of LSBU's Race and Cultural Equity Affinity Group. I'm also joined by Joe Bressy-Ander, an independent occupational therapist working in neurorehabilitation and again, a member of the network. And yeah, how this session will proceed is that each of the panelists, as with earlier sessions, will have 10 minutes to present to us on an aspect of their work. I'll fade away into the background and I'll come back to help keep track of time by turning on my camera when there's around 2 minutes left. And I'll pop back in after they've finished before handing over to the next presenter. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the fantastic Charlene.
Thanks, Eden. Hello, everyone. It's an honour and a pleasure to be here. I'm very nervous, by the way. My name is Charlene Graham. I am an occupational therapist based in the UK, working for Hertfordshire County Council in adult care services. I am a co-author of a chapter in the book called The Anti-Racist Social Worker, Stories of Activism by social care and allied health professionals. Hopefully some of you have had the chance to grab a copy of the book and have a read. The chapter is called It's Not Black and White, a parallel journey to anti-racist action by two occupational therapists. Before I continue talking about the chapter, I'd like each of you to think about making your own personal pledges or steps of action that you can take to rise against racism. Please share these in the Q&A. The chat facility is not enabled for you guys in the audience. So if you can use the Q&A section to just pinpoint what your actions, what you plan to do, actions that you'll be taking. They don't have to be massive things. You don't have to go on and march or make a massive campaign. It's actually the act of doing something that is the most important thing. I co-authored the chapter with Catherine Greenlaw, who at the time of writing the book was the principal occupational therapist for Hertfordshire County Council. And we were offered this opportunity by the principal social worker, Tanya Moore, who was she was the principal social worker at the time as well. So she also edited the book. So she gave us both the opportunity to write the chapter. So the title of the chapter kind of describes us, the authors, as I am Black and Catherine is white. It tells you about our lives, our history, our experiences of racism, and how they have impacted us and what we do to promote anti-racism in our personal and professional lives. The main aim of the chapter really is to highlight the impact of racism and to call on all occupational therapists to do something, to take action, be it big or small, but to be consistent with that action. Racism is not a black and white issue. It's not that clear cut, it's complicated. Take, for example, colorisms, where people with darker skin are more discriminated against in comparison to someone who's got lighter skin. Stemming back to the days of slavery, where a white slave master would father a mixed child, these lighter skinned individuals would get privilege, such as working in the house, doing less hard chores rather than working in the field where you're under the sun and burning up and stuff, So just not any real advantage either way. But colorisms don't only occur within the Black community, they also occur in the Asian culture as well, where skin bleaching or avoiding the sun is necessary so that you're not seen as a lesser person or someone who's poorer. From reading the chapter, we learn that racism is a negative force that harms, diminishes, and denies people full and equal engagement and occupation in society. As occupational therapists, looking at activities of daily living, we can see the impact racism has on the lives of Black people, such as being a Black mother. Black women are 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women in the UK. In terms of education, children identifying as Black Caribbean are 6 times more likely to experience school exclusion compared to their white British counterparts. Black British people are over 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. And there's so much data highlighting these inequalities with regards to Black people. So occupational therapists, as you probably all know, are known to help people live their best lives wherever they go, be it at home, school, work, play. They support people to engage in meaningful activities by helping them to overcome barriers or challenges, therefore enabling independence and promoting well-being. So it is important for them to know about the range of barriers created by racism, as people are likely to need additional input to overcome these barriers. Occupational therapists use various frames of references and theories to analyse and understand relationships between activities alongside the challenges faced in the environment. This therefore suggests that occupational therapists can help fight to overcome racism, which we've already established is a huge barrier to life. Racism is unjust, it's unfair, it excludes people from society where they are unable to participate, prosper, or reach their full potential. There is nothing equitable about racism or upholding the various systems that impose its negative power over the life of those impacted by it. This is why platforms like this and equity in action is so important. What I found quite disturbing really in all of this is the denial that people are discriminated against because of the colour of their skin and the shying away from conversations about racism. In the chapter, both Catherine and I recognise the lack of diversity in our course content and on our cohorts. Why was that? Was it a case of racism, unconscious bias, racial bias? So I'm hoping since the murder of George Floyd that all institutions teaching occupational therapy are actively changing their curriculum content to include things like unconscious bias training, cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness, where lessons on racism are not, lessons on racism are just as paramount as moving and handling or safeguarding, because we all have to do that, don't we? And not just a tick box exercise, but a topic that is taught to all learners. So in the event they are faced with any form of racism, they'll be able to recognise it, call it out, and be confident to act on it without the fear of disrupting the status quo. As you can see, I'm a Black occupational therapist and I work in a location where the majority of my clients do not look like me at all. This does have an impact on me. However, my experiences of racism is very different to that of my parents and my siblings, where racism was extremely overt. I'm faced with more microaggressions, like when people don't expect me to have been born in this country, because obviously I have to come from Africa. Having the opportunity to write about and share my experiences of racism in my everyday life as a Black occupational therapist in social care was a perfect way for me to talk about my truth and share my experiences for the benefit of those trying to understand the impact of racism. I understand it is not my job to educate everyone, because I know that constantly having to educate people through reliving, retelling various experiences can be exhausting and traumatic. However, I feel that at the moment I'm in a place where I'm able to talk and share, but I also have a lot to learn about racism and promoting anti-racism. Because I'm Black, I'm not the expert, I don't have all the answers, and there's lots of things for me to learn, you know. I was asked how I felt to co-author with a white leader, as it highlighted our racial hierarchy between us. At the time, I hadn't thought about it at all. I was just excited to have been given such an amazing opportunity, because becoming a published author was never on my agenda. But on reflection, I did begin to wonder if it had not been for Catherine and her privilege, would I have been given that opportunity? I felt that Catherine had used her power and privilege as a positive, which worked in my favour to allow me to be heard and seen. She became my ally and my advocate. So due to structural racism, it is reported that Black people are rarely in positions of power. Therefore, they are not seen and issues of racism go unnoticed. Because the people in power are not affected by racism, so there's no need to challenge the status quo or break down the barriers. So allyship is very important, so we can dismantle racism together in partnership. There is a need for all occupational therapists to be anti-racist practitioners, where they learn and develop the necessary skills needed to remove racism from practice and society. Anti-racism and allyship are verbs. It is about doing and about taking action. And like I said before, it doesn't have to be a big campaign, it can be just small things. But people have to start so we can all rise against racism. I'm going to end my talk with a quote from David Lammy. And it says, "It seems that Britain is finally ready to have a real long overdue conversation about structural racism. But we must not be complacent. Actions, not words, are what will make a difference in our schools, courts of justice, or places of work. To make a real change, we need leaders of integrity, allies willing to show their support, and sponsors in our businesses who can challenge the status quo. We need the job of those in power to be breaking down barriers for those who come next." Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And there's so much in there that's so important to just take in: the importance of doing something, the importance of embedding anti-racist teaching and education into curriculums in a meaningful and universal way, and so much more. Thank you again, as ever. And yeah, so we'll move on to our next presenter, Cheryl. And yeah, I'll come back in when you've got minutes left. But over to you.
Thank you, Eden. Hello, everyone. So firstly, I'd like to say I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today, and I give God all the glory for that. So my name is Cheryl Tayson. I am an occupational therapist and a research assistant. I completed the postgraduate occupational therapy course in October 2020 from London South Bank University. During the course as a student, I had the opportunity to embark on the first occupational therapy leadership placement with a London-based NHS trust provided to the university. And when I arrived at the placement, the trust were in the middle of planning an annual CPD event for their AHP staff regarding finding out what their BME staff needs are. CPD is continuing professional development. So they wanted me to help design the event from an equality, diversity, and inclusion approach, an EDI approach, as I had stated in my introduction to them, that I was interested in EDI for service improvement. I changed it to equity, diversity, and inclusion, as I believe the term equality is about universality, which is problematic. Equity is about meeting the needs of people so they can thrive. The CPD event became about gathering understanding of what staff from BME heritages would require to enable them to thrive and progress in the workplace. On this placement, I led in designing, organizing, and delivering the EDI CPD event under the supervision of the head occupational therapist. So the first activity was gaining the trust of the staff to gather them for an event to have a mixture of speakers who presented on topics such as what the trust is doing regarding racism and discrimination, and external speakers who presented on allyship, experiences of reverse mentoring. The event finished up with a video depicting how difficult it is for BME people in society compared to white people due to the privileges that come with being white. The event concluded with a Jamboard, which enabled staff to comment anonymously on what they thought of the event. The second activity, which was after the CPD event, was 2 focus groups were organized, one group for staff who identified as the staff of ethnicity, and the other focus group was for the white allyship group to discuss with me and a co-facilitator their experiences working within the trust and how to improve their workspaces. The rationale and design for the 2 focus groups to gather additional information about experiences and improvement suggestions. The third activity is where I analysed the data from activity 2 and I presented outcomes from the data to executives and managers. In the presentation, I had to handle challenging questions from the audience, and as I was able to refer to my data to answer their questions, it seemed to help them improve their understanding of staff views and needs, and their questions helped me to get an enhanced understanding of the audience's views and worries. The fourth activity, which was the end of my placement, I had to write a report integrating the themes from the staff focus groups on how to improve to embed sustainable change and to improve equity and how to monitor change. My grade for this placement was exceptional in every single assessment criteria. So the outcome, so the placement was only for 8 weeks. Therefore, I wasn't able to complete the implementation part of what had been started. The staff asked for me to come back to continue to work on the project, and the therapist offered me a job to work with them once a month, strictly on this project. As a result of this, I am working with them at the moment on this project, as equity and justice is something I'm very passionate about, seeing in action in the workplace. Starting change I know is very difficult, but if I can contribute to this for it to sustain, then it's worth the hard labor. So I just want to go through a few challenges that I faced and how I overcame these challenges during the placement. So for example, getting the right time for myself and the co-facilitator to arrange suitable time and dates for the focus group was difficult, and making sure the focus groups didn't clash with any of the other events that were also happening at the trust. Management also trying to change the purpose and direction of the focus group structure, as they were worried about the negative feedback they would receive from their employees. Possibly because some of them I feel were guilty of showing some sort of impartiality among the staff of ethnicity. And at times I found myself having to really stick to my guns and tell them that if they want transparency and honesty, they will have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And it was hard being a student and having to worry about if my boldness could affect my grade with my supervisor at the time. My supervisor was lovely, and she was honest with me that she's literally learning so much from the project that I was leading. I also had Mushrat Ahmed Landiyu as a mentor and support outside of this placement, and this helped me bounce back from any uncertainty I was feeling. And it gave me the courage to continue with such a bold project for the duration of my placement. Another challenge I had was one of the white managers wanting to make their presence known in the focus group for staff of ethnicity, and even made it look like they were worried about me being a student and having to facilitate this group. This is where I had to also put my foot down and say that having the presence of a white person is going to disrupt the honesty and transparency of the employee's truth. Therefore, I was only going to co-facilitate with another Black member of staff who is in a managerial position, as I felt like it went against the equal safe space I was trying to create with each group. And once the data had been analysed and themes were derived from it, I had to present the findings to the OT management and executives. This was a very tense meeting, as they were very defensive and in denial at some point that people of ethnicity were facing such inequalities and racism within the workplace from colleagues, managers, and even patients. One of the managers even tried to put pressure on me to let them talk to the people who had experienced such an ordeal, and I declined, as I promised the participants that their stories were safe with me and that it would be confidential. So just a bit about how the placement developed my research skills. So I analysed qualitative data from group discussions, and I applied Pope et al. Thematic analysis to identify themes, and then categorising the themes to then write a report. Groups facilitated using prompt questions and recorded with permission from the participants. It also helped develop my ability to collaborate effectively with external project partners, the research team, and my colleagues. It helped me to be GDPR compliant and ensuring that all information on the placement computer was password protected. This placement enabled me to have excellent organizational and research related administrative skills, able to use initiative, plan, prioritize, and organize my varied workload in a timely manner. My ability to also operate flexibly and work to deadlines with tight schedules calmly and effectively. So what did I enjoy about doing a leadership placement and why I would encourage this practice to continue as a placement opportunity? I really enjoy doing a leadership placement. It really takes you out of your comfort zone. I mean, by the end of the placement, I couldn't believe how much impact I had made on that trust, even while being a student. And this placement brought opportunities my way afterwards, as the management made sure that they would want me to come back and work with them and continue what I'd started. So I would like to just encourage universities to enable more students to embark on leadership placements, as it really does make you very autonomous, which is good in preparation for the real world once you qualify as an occupational therapist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was fascinating to hear, and fantastic to hear how much impact you had as a student within that environment, in which there can be various power imbalances between the students on the course, on placements, and the trust itself, and to hear how you overcome various challenges to create such an impact and do such a large amount of work is, I'm sure, heartening to myself and other students who might be hoping to make changes in the future in ours. So thank you again for everything and for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And next we'll come to Joe, and I'll hand straight over to you, Joe.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say that I'm enjoying the day so much so far, and I'm really humbled to be part of this panel this afternoon. And also just to preface my presentation with, you're going to hear a disembodied voice on the slides. That's because I'm trying to save my voice. I don't want to sound very croaky. But I will be back after the presentation and part of the panel, so enjoy. How will the occupational therapy profession advance equity and justice for service users? Some of you may have seen my poster presentation, which gives a bit more background on who I am and what I do. But for those of you unfamiliar with me, my name is Jo Bresciando, and that's me in a picture taken from my website. I'm a neuro rehab OT working independently, and I've been running my own business since 2016. The question about how we as OTs advance equity and justice for our service users is probably not one that I was actively and consciously thinking about in the early stages of my career. When I started out, which was in the NHS, I was more focused on building my practical skills and trying to work out how what I'd been taught at university could be applied to the very real people I was starting to work with. Once I felt that I'd worked that out, I eventually started moving up the career ladder. My experiences of the NHS gave me a great foundation to my career. However, it was my frustration about the length of time it took me to reach senior positions compared to my more non-BAME colleagues, and combined with my belief that there is more than one way to be an OT, that eventually pushed me to move into independent practice and start my own business. I don't think that I've ever considered myself to be a political person or an activist, and I certainly wouldn't consider myself as someone who has any great knowledge or expertise about equity within healthcare. I'm just an ordinary clinician helping those that I come into contact with. However, reflecting on the question about how the profession advances equity has made me realise that it's us, the ordinary OTs doing the day-to-day job, who hold the power to make the changes. Recognising inequity is taking steps to redress a power imbalance by putting those most disadvantaged at the forefront. I've always worked in London in a variety of boroughs, and all of them have had some areas of deprivation. I've worked with extremely poor people and those who would be considered well off. As I've reflected on my own practice and looked back over my career, I see that I was probably unconsciously trying to provide an equitable service. And the only reason I think that happened was because of my own background. My lived experience of being a Black woman in the UK and having the knowledge of how society views us in general and where it places us in terms of a hierarchy prepared me consciously and unconsciously to provide a more equitable service for those who I've used and recognised as having a similar cultural, social and economic background to me. My experiences allowed me to recognise the power imbalance between those marginalised communities accessing health services and the system that was providing it. And specifically from an OT point of view, recognising that their lives and occupations did not always fit into the model of occupation that I was taught. I continue to use my ethnicity and cultural background as part of my independent work. What I found is that independent practice has largely been the same as working in the NHS in terms of who I have and, more importantly, who I choose to have on my caseload. People who I suppose would be classified as having low to middle socio-economic background. I like to specialise in vocational rehab and supporting people back to work. I find it interesting, it's fun, but it can also be challenging. When a person with an acquired brain injury starts out on their recovery journey, the focus within the first 6 months is usually on regaining basic skills and transitioning back to the home and community. Returning to work is often not seriously considered within those early months, much to the detriment of the client. Many of the vocational rehab referrals I receive now are for people who are 1 year plus from their initial injury, and if they're lucky, they're on sick leave and still have a job and an employer willing to consider a return to work. I think there's a definite pattern that I've seen with the people that I work with and who is more likely to be successful in returning to some form of employment. And honestly, it tends to be those that we would identify as originating from the global north. There's a general lack of awareness and consideration given to return to work and vocational rehab anyway for those people with an acquired brain injury, but it appears to impact more on those from a BAME or Global South background. Within the UK, we know that minoritised communities are more likely to be in a poorer socio-economic position than that of their non-BAME counterparts. What the BAME clients I work with now have in common with the BAME clients I saw when I was in the NHS is that they often had jobs with little security. They had contracts that were 0 hours, so worked ridiculous amounts of hours each week. And often there was no sick pay. They were in jobs where they were easily replaced and the employer did not need them back. These were also employers who had no access to an occupational health department that they could refer to, or at least get advice from, so that they could do the right thing by their employee. These are the people whose care and treatment becomes complicated and challenging because they lose their job, lose their home that they're often renting, and then there's no viable place to provide OT intervention. It can lead to the breakup of families and communities, and due to the stress and trauma, the client can go into survival mode, with therapy way down on their list of priorities. I recognise all of this because of my background and through my lived experience. I know the additional burdens that BAME members of society go through. It allows me to anticipate these potential issues and try to take steps to redress the imbalance as far as I can. But what happens if your cultural background is so far removed from those you work with that you don't recognise the inequity they live with and the impact it can have on the services that they receive? I recently read a reflection piece on the website OT Therapy Hub, and it was written by Amy Diamond in 2019. It was called Being and Becoming an OT in Rural South Africa. She describes the system in South Africa where graduate OTs are required to do a year of community service, and this is often in government-run facilities that can be anywhere in the country. These facilities are often in rural, underserviced areas. She goes on to describe how she was posted to the Northern Cape in the Kalahari, and she reflects on the social and economic inequality between herself and the people she was working with, and the struggle she felt to form what she felt were genuine partnerships. What really struck me were her comments about the apparent mismatch between what she had been taught at university around occupation and the mismatch with what she was seeing in front of her. She talked about how, as a newly qualified OT, do you deal with this when you're still discovering yourself as an occupational therapist? She discussed the problem with a university curriculum that teaches OTs a particularly Western viewpoint about what occupation is or should be, and what activities then fit under that heading. The world's occupational narrative is not universally the same, and it doesn't consist of productivity, leisure, and self-care activities for all. For many people, life is about survival, and it's a world away from our idea of occupation. Just as in the NHS, my independent work still presents me with clients who have had a negative experience with OTs who had no real knowledge of how to relate to the person who was in front of them. And despite what they were being presented with, the OT continued to try and steer the client to fit into what they knew and understood occupation to be. Maybe this was in order to reduce the discomfort that they felt about working with the client. I think the future rests with increased numbers and better representation of BAME OTs working in the independent sector. I also think that we must produce future practitioners that have been educated in a system that prepares them to successfully address inequity and social injustice. This means producing OTs that have been educated in a decolonized curriculum and system, a system that includes global South knowledge and perspectives, whilst examining the political and societal legacies of colonialism and how it still influences what is taught. To the ordinary OTs working with minoritized clients of all backgrounds, whether you're in statutory services or the independent sector, you are in the position of power and privilege. Improve your awareness of the additional barriers and burdens that BAME people carry and the impact that this has on their occupations. It may not fit with what you understand and believe to be occupation, but you're an OT, so adapt your intervention. It's what we're good at after all.
Thank you so much, Joe. There's so much food for thought there, from thinking about putting the most disadvantaged first to stopping and thinking who are the most disadvantaged. I think there's a lot for us all to think about there and take in. And I'm sure across this day, there's been much content and so much food for thought. And I hope we can all reflect on what we've learned here and across the day in other sessions. I think from now we'll move into the Q&A portion of this session. So as before, there is a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. You can click on there and post your questions. And once received, I can share them with our wonderful panelists. We may not get through every question, but we've got a good amount of time, so hopefully we get through whatever people do share. I think there are a couple of comments in there already. I think a few of them are in relation to what you mentioned, Charlene, about personal pledges. We've got one from Cindy. I'm currently planning doctoral studies aimed at exploring the experiences of racial injustices lived by Black occupational therapists at work. I also draw comics related to the Black experience. That's fantastic.
That sounds amazing, Cindy. I'm a visual learner, so I like looking at pictures, so that'd be awesome to see some of your work. I think comics, I'm not into comics, but any kind of illustration would be awesome. So yeah, that'd be good if you could share that at some point if you're on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, if you could make that happen, that would be awesome. I'd love to see that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We also have a comment from Lee. We are reviewing our curriculum and our plans for engaging our students in the redesign. We have been working on decolonising the curriculum, and after attending today, need a stronger focus on listening to our BAME students and staff. I'm also trying to gain funding for research to understand the student experience through the admissions process, with a focus on BAME, disability and LGBTQIA+. And today has demonstrated the need for the student voice to be heard and action to take place.
Yeah, definitely. With regards to the curriculum, I think there needs to be a lot of changes, because I know society has a lot to kind of, it has a big contribution with regards to the views that people have around like Black people. And if it can start in a place of education where lots of people attend, I mean, even as early as schools, not even like university and stuff. And I think in the book we wrote about OTs being political. I think the government needs to be responsible for some of these things, and those people in higher places in the institutions, the learning institutions. So if your curriculum is involved in the views of Black, I'll say Black because it's just easier for me to say Black. I mean, all Black, brown, people of colour, however you want to refer to general people. Yeah, it's good to hear their voices. They need to be represented. We need to be represented. So that's awesome. But like Isla had said, it's not something that's going to happen in a minute. It's going to take a while. Mistakes will happen, you know. But again, humility is awesome. Listening is perfect. You know, just do what you've got to do, really, and do what's right. I mean, there's been so much in this whole symposium that I've even said I've got so much to learn, like the language and like using the wrong language and reading about the wrong people or sharing the wrong authors. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that person was a racist. I better not share that person anymore, you know? So yeah, we've all got so much to learn. So thank you for putting those posts in there. And with regards to student experience, and Cheryl knows a lot about that stuff. So I think that, you know, she could talk about that.
Yeah, if we can come to Cheryl, especially on the student experience.
Yeah, sure. So being in university and having the chance to actually share my experiences of racial discrimination or racism, however you want to put it, it was just really good that I had lecturers that were able to listen, because I've been so used to them either silencing you or not taking on board what you're saying too seriously. So someone like Mish and Dr. Anita Twal, you know, people who are from a ethnic background, it was nice for them to actually take on board what I was saying, and for us to make sure that other students, you know, heard about this, and it could help us develop the process for complaints and so forth, because we realized there wasn't really a good complaint process for reporting racism. So I think it's very important as a university or an education organization for you to really take in consideration the students. At the end of the day, we're here, we're paying our tuition fees, which are a lot. So like we expect the quality of care and education and the curriculum that's being given to us to be of a good quality. So yes, I think it's good if we take the students into consideration. Their voices are powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And again, that's that importance of listening, both in terms of to people's experiences and what their needs and expectations are of these institutions in which we come into contact with and need to access the world of occupational therapy in the West. And in terms of Joe, I know you mentioned kind of the need for people to learn within kind of decolonized spaces and that is integrated into their education. I wondered if there was an example of a piece of learning that you feel is vitally important for new occupational therapists to learn before they go into practice.
Not off the top of my head can I think of something, but what I will say is I suppose my viewpoint is always that of a clinician, and how we as clinicians, practicing clinicians, relate to students, you know, and for most of us that's going to be through practice placements, you know. So I think that is where we have the power to make a change. I think it's about every practicing clinician, if you take students, making sure that you actually find out what it is that the students are taught in university, and then helping them to really relate that to the patients and clients that they see whilst they're with you. Because I think it's, you know, I remember being a student and having all the models and things in my head, and all I was ever thinking about was, how does this person fit in this model? You know, not how does the model actually, is the model correct with what I'm seeing? Does it make sense? Does it fit with what I'm being presented with? Because at the end of the day, all you have is your university learning when you come out. You know, you have nothing else yet. That's what you rely on, because that's what you know and that's what's comforting. But if you've already learned before you've come out, I think if you've already learned from practicing OTs that actually you need to flip the script a bit, you need to be able to transport what you've been taught and apply it to the person in front of you. And this is what it means. This is what you're really seeing. I think by the time students then come out, they've already got that critical thinking around, you know, actually what is going on in the real world. I know there was, I can't remember who said it earlier, but I think it was Juman, around, you know, sometimes the disconnect between research and practice. And that can be such a big barrier sometimes. And if there was a way to make sure that our educational system brings in the whole idea of decolonization and how actually you need to be able to take what you've learned, apply it to this person, and actually feed that back to the researchers in some way, feed that back to your university tutors to say, actually, when I was out there, this didn't quite fit. This is not what I'm seeing. This doesn't fit with this particular group of people. What then? How then are you going to prepare me? Because these are the people I'm going to work with. So yeah, I think it's hard. It's going to be a long road, and it's about everybody educating yourself, whether you're a practicing clinician, whether you're retired, whether you're a student, whether you're a tutor. You know, we all need to kind of come together now and say, look, we need to do this for the good of our service users. At the end of the day, they are the people who we serve.
Thank you. That's everyone taking responsibility. And it's fitting that we should have started the day with a talk around collective responsibility. In terms of the Q&A section of the Zoom, we have a comment to you, Cheryl, on when you were speaking. Good on you for sticking to your guns. I think we can all back that up. Big credit to you for sticking to your guns and working through that and doing what you've done. We also have a question for you here from Sylvia. Hello, Cheryl. I am 11 years post-qualifying. I'm 11 years post-qualifying as an OT. Did you qualify as an OT before doing the leadership placement? Any tips on finding placements?
No, I didn't qualify before doing the leadership placement. I was still in my final year. It was the university that found the leadership placement. I think they had asked a few people if they were interested, and people had turned it down. But also it was very good for me because it was a virtual one at the time because of COVID and everything. So this was like the first leadership placement that a student had taken part in. So I wasn't qualified, but I still work with that trust now that I've qualified as an occupational therapist. And in terms of tips for placement, I think maybe just be quite open with the placement team. Let them know what you're interested in. I think my placement team were aware of how vocal I was being about, you know, regarding EDI. So when they came across this placement and what they wanted to do as an organization for the EDI project, she thought it would be perfect for me. So I think that's just important for you to just highlight your strengths or what you're interested in, and also to come out of your comfort zone as well, because I've never been in a leadership placement. But yeah, it was something that I can really say helped push me to another level. So I would definitely advise for people to take that on board. But in terms of finding a placement, just be honest and transparent about what you're into with your placement team. I hope that helps.
Sure, it does. Thank you. And we also have a question here from Kay. How can we ensure our CPD resources incorporate equity, diversity and belonging, EDB? Do you like to, Charlene, have you got a comment on that one?
I'd say go to RCOP. They should be able to answer all your questions. Now, I think, to be fair, I've found a lot of CPD stuff from the British Association of Social Work. They've got a load of resources. I think our website as well, I think Eden, I think our website has got some resources in it. I'm not sure how much. But again, it's like looking at what people are sharing, what people are talking about. When obviously George Floyd was murdered, a lot of people were sharing all sorts of things. So it's just, I mean, I'm not a lecturer. I'm not in what do you call it, education at all. So I mean, getting in touch with places of education that can tell you what you need to know about what's relevant and stuff like that, reading books and whatever. But yeah, I think, yeah, there's lots of things out there.
That's a good point. There's lots of resources on our website. I'm sure there'll be more in the future, but there's a big long list that you can look at as well, and that's BAMEOTUK. And Josh, Cheryl, have you any further comment on that in terms of how we can ensure our CPD resources incorporate these important subjects?
I think also utilizing social media, because Twitter is very, rampant, and people are very expressive on there and share what they have, the resources they have, and that's how people connect. So I think that's also very important. And also the trust that you're probably working for, they might have some resources, or they have like an EDI representative, an EDI rep who can also help guide you to where you can get resources that do embed, equality, diversity and belonging. But like Charlene said, also RCOP have that too. And yeah, check out BAMEOTUK UK as well. But yeah, I do think some CPD resources are a little bit scarce with actual authentic EDI information in there. Maybe that's something that needs to be worked on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And are there any further comments from you, Joe, on that question before we move on to the next question?
Nothing really to add that hasn't already been said.
Fair enough. Yeah, so moving further down, we've got a comment from Kay as well in terms of making people think about their actions and reflecting. And we also have a question, Joe, or anyone else who cares to comment. Without breaking confidentiality, can you give an example of a mismatch between colonized curriculum defined occupation and a real example? So a mismatch between that perception of that idea of occupation in this society and a real example that you came across.
I can't. It's not probably what I have in my head is not a direct answer to that question, but what it did make me think about was when I was learning, one of the first things you pick up is that we are there to kind of make people independent. And I remember having those conversations at uni about what does independence mean, and does that actually fit into everybody's culture? And so, and I know specifically, having conversations and even arguments within sort of like tutor groups at uni that, well, we're here to make people independent. They should be able to do for themselves. They should be able to stand on their own 2 feet, because in terms of rehab, that's what you're trying to get them back to where they were before they had an injury or an illness. And I think, that for me, that's a classic example. There are so many cultures out here where actually independence within, if you take the family unit or the cultural unit, independence is not their core way of being. It is about being interdependent. It's about leaning on each other. It's about shared resources and shared community. And often that might actually come because of lack of resources, lack of opportunities anyway. Maybe their communities have, had to develop that way of being because they've started at a lower baseline. They didn't have the privilege, they didn't have the resources that people could think independently. In order to survive, they needed to band together in order to move themselves forward. So for me, I think that's one of your classic mismatches there. Most people, it's a long time since I've been in uni and in education, but back then it was all about being independent and this was a solitary person that you were working on. You took the family into consideration, you took the environment into consideration, but you were looking at that one person in isolation, and then how do you help them to kind of move on? And I think even just from my own working with people of different backgrounds, it just doesn't work like that. That is the mismatch, because you're not able to take yourself into their reality. If you remain in that standpoint that this person is alone within a broader community, you're never going to be able to build that rapport. You're not listening to you're not taking into account the fact that their culture values interdependency, that they don't want that person to move away independently, because for them, that's not what life is. So yeah, that's the example that that's the best example that I can think of at the moment.
Thank you. That's a great example and something for us all to think about, especially as we practice and learn in terms of evaluating whether what we're learning is universal, or rather, in many cases, in most cases, a product of the culture and the values of our society in which we learn. And anything to add from Charlene or Cheryl further to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I've recently it wasn't to do with obviously curriculum, it's that practice. So I had a referral for a gentleman who is Bangladeshi, older Bangladeshi man who's got a lot of issues, health issues and stuff. And my colleague went out to basically assess, and it was a case of, well, we need him to be independent with various tasks. I think he can do it. He might be a bit lazy, that sort of thing. I put my culture head and I thought, well, actually, he's Bangladeshi, he's older. Is there actually, would he go into the kitchen? Would you go in the kitchen and start making meals and stuff? Or are there clear gender roles within this culture? So for me, it was important for my colleague to have probably thought about that before coming back and saying, oh, well, he should be able to do this, he should be able to do that. And I personally don't know a lot about Bangladeshi, the Bangladeshi culture at all. And you have to be careful that you don't generalize, because like Joe said, you've got to look at that person as that solitary, that individual at that time. You're not looking at all Bangladeshis are the same, because you might have some Bangladeshi men at 80 years old, quite happy to cook, clean, wash, whatever. But obviously the age that he was, actually, it wasn't his time to be in the kitchen and cooking. It was his time to actually relax and for the family to collectively look after him. So it's not about him being lazy. It's about, actually, this is what my culture do. We work collectively, not individualistically, So I think it's important to be aware of the global South and how, the different cultures do what they do. Be open. Don't kind of say, okay, well, this is what we do, so this is what you're going to do. And it's not the same. So it's very important to be aware of those things, so that you don't get it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong, but you don't go there, get it wrong. You figure it out before you go, and you kind of put your foot in it a little bit, But yeah, that was my actual experience. And like I'd said before, I don't often get to work with people of colour. Most of my clients are predominantly white. So, I used to working with white people rather than actually people of colour. So that was very interesting for me as well. Actually, I learned that day, and I was, oh, this is cool. So it's pretty interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you. And the importance there of listening and being aware, and again, who is the person that is in front of us, not fitting them into the boxes that we learn and the models that we have necessarily, but understanding them as an individual and in their wider context as people as part of a community. And yeah, we have a further comment on I think what you were describing before, Joe, we have a comment here from Deborah. You are making a really good point about questioning curriculum for UK students, but also for our international students who will be returning to their countries being an OT in very different contexts.
Yeah, when I read that comment, it made me think about my background is Ghanaian heritage, born here. But if you're from an African or West Caribbean background, you're going to know that your parents, your family, you still know all about your heritage mainly. And you kind of grow up straddling the Western ideas and back home type of thing. You know, we all kind of grow up with that. And when I became an OT and when I realized the power of what it could do and how it could help people, one of my first thoughts was, how would this work in Ghana? How would I, how could I give back? How could I take my practice to Ghana and, help people there? And I thought to myself, you know what, I don't think I can, because I'm too Western in terms of I understand the way their thought processes work, and I understand how they, what they value. But whilst understanding it, my upbringing here and my culture here didn't give me enough skills, I think, in order to cross that divide. So whilst I acknowledge and I love that side of who I am and my culture, I understand it for international students. If you're being taught in a way that does not fit with what you know, if you're going to go back home and practice, I can well imagine how difficult that is for them, because one, you're learning something that is probably alien to you anyway, and you're here in this country and you're coming to terms with being here and everything that goes with living in a different society to what you're used to. And then if you're going back, but how do you do that without support? I don't know how they do that, but if somebody's managed to do it, I take their hat off to them. And I think it's something that should be shared, in terms of making it more a global, international OT community. These are the voices that we don't hear of. These are exactly the people, they're here as students, but we never quite hear maybe how, when they returned home, how did they actually flip the script? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Are they frustrated? And I think, yeah, we just don't get to hear those voices, which is a real shame.
Very important points there, and I think like you say, it's important for us to remember we may be BAMEOTuk UK, but we are part of a wider community. So it's a very important question there that we might all want to think about in terms of as people of a diaspora in various parts who've come from various parts of the world, how do we connect to the cultures from which we came, and how are we able to support and help those of us that are in those our homelands, or how we describe them. But yeah, thank you all. I think it's been a fantastic session, and I'd like to thank all three of you for your insights, your experiences, and what you've shared with us today, which is so much to think about and understand. And I'm sure I speak for the audience when I say we've learned a lot. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eden. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And don't forget to go and buy your book. Okay? You can read it.
I'll certainly be having a read. Speak for myself. But yeah, so that comes to the end of our second panel here. The next will be a short 15-minute break before the next session. As mentioned previously, it's time to step away from the screen, have a move around, take a break. Where, as has been described before as well, we're already starting to plan for next year's symposium, and we're raising money for this via GoFundMe. So please, if you're able to, or if you'd like to contribute, get involved, please, there's a link on the symposium platform for the GoFundMe, and any contribution is helpful. So yeah, next we will see you back here at 4 o'clock for afternoon keynote session. So yeah, we'll see you at 4 o'clock.